Hey buddy, Charles here with Side by Side Garage, and today I'm going to be showing you how to dismount and mount a single beadlock wheel, as well as installing a set of these rapid deflating valve stems from Apex Performance products. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, so today, like I said, I'm going to be dismounting and mounting a single beadlock wheel. The wheel that I'm going to be taking off is this 15 by 10 STI beadlock, and it is currently mounted on a 37-12.5 Interco Trxus M. I'm going to be switching over to this set of wheels right here. I don't have to switch wheels. The reason I'm doing it is just because I wanted to change the look with this razor, just because those STI beadlocks with those tires was on the old razor and I wanted something new for this one, just to freshen it up a bit. Real fast, let's talk about this wheel right here. This is a 15 by 10 Baja Crusher wheel. I got these from Alba Racing. Whenever you buy this wheel, you're going to get the wheel, beadlock ring, all the mounting hardware for it. These also even came with valve stems already in there, which is really nice. Like I said, this is a 15 by 10. It is split right down the middle because this is a true three-piece wheel. So you actually have your outer hoop, your inner hoop, as well as your mounting surface in here. These are all separate pieces bolted together. Whenever you get these wheels, you want to make sure that you have the sealant on here. Again, because this is a three-piece wheel that's pressed together, you actually have to have something in there to keep the air in the tire. You can't just simply bolt it together. So there is going to be a sealant down through here. Comes with your beadlock ring on the outside here. A nice feature with this beadlock ring and the surface right here on the wheel where your tire bead actually rides is that surface is serrated, so that gives a little bit of extra bite on your tire bead, just to hold on to it a little bit better. The hardware that comes with this is all flanged, the beadlock ring hardware, as well as the hardware that's mounting that inner mounting surface to your wheel hoops. It's all 8/8 hardware. Like I mentioned before, this is a 15 by 10, so it is 10 inches wide. The wheel offset here is 0. Now remember in the other video I talked to you about wheel offset, what that is. So this is a 0 offset, which means that it has 5 inches out here and 5 inches of backspace. The wheel with all the hardware together, I weighed it. It was 20 pounds, 0.3 ounces, so basically 20 pounds. For you guys that are wondering about the weight. Because this is a three-piece wheel, it actually opens up a lot of options for you as far as customizing your ride. You could swap out the inner piece there, go get it powder coated, or powder coat your beadlock ring, powder coat your hoops or whatever, just to help change up the look of your razor or your side-by-side. Also, kind of like the other Raceline double beadlocks I showed you, you could take this center piece out and go buy a different bolt pattern if you got rid of your machine and you got a different one that had a different bolt pattern for your hubs. Or if you happen to damage some part of this wheel, you could contact the company and replace just that portion of the wheel that got damaged, whether it be your beadlock ring was mangled, you somehow put a hole through one of these hoops or whatever. So that's really nice because that cuts down on the cost of the wheel, considering the entire wheel together is a decent amount. Something that I know that came up whenever I ordered these wheels is that I saw stuff about clearancing with the brake calipers on the Turbo S. So I actually, before I mounted up the tires, I double checked. It looks like these are machined the correct way so that they'll clear. And I went ahead and actually threw one on there before just to double check, and it did clear the brake caliper. But keep that in mind if you do have a Turbo S or whatever. You should always probably do a test fit of the wheel on your machine before you go mounting tires, because most companies, as soon as you mount a tire on there, they won't take it back. One really nice feature I like with this wheel is that the inside here where your lug nuts go is actually open enough that you can run the stock style lug nut. Like this right here is a regular lug nut with a 19 mil or 3/4 socket is what you'd use on it. There's enough room to actually run that lug nut. I know a lot of aftermarket wheels, you have to switch over to these spline drives because there's the hole in the wheel is really small. All right, next up we're going to talk about these rapid deflating valve stems. These are from Apex Performance Products. The whole thing with these is that you can let air out of your tires very, very fast. So a lot of you know that me and Tony, we do a ton of rock crawling and snow wheeling. It is the favorite type of riding that we do, especially snow wheeling. We love it. That's why we're running these big tires like this and really wide wheels. So usually what we do out there on the trail, we'll show up with, 10 or 12 pounds of air in our tires just because we want to cut down on that rolling resistance whenever we're, here at the house or the shop or whatever, you're on pavement. But when you get out there to the snow or the rocks, you actually need to air down there. Now in the snow, a lot of times we're at 0 PSI. So what we typically do, you have your standard valve stem, and then we usually have 3 or 4 of these. These are just your standard clip-on air chucks. And then we would just take the cap off of our valve stem, clip those on there, let the air flow out of it. It works, especially if you've got 4 of those, so you can throw all 4 of them on each tire at the same time. But it's still kind of slow just because you're letting all that air out through such a small space inside of that valve stem. A lot of guys will use a valve core removal tool and actually remove that core out of there. But the problem with that is, especially in the snow, if you happen to drop that valve stem core, then your day can get really bad because sure you're going to have fun air down snow wheeling, but whenever you need to load that thing back up or whatever and get out of there, you don't have that core to stick back in that valve stem. So something that's really nice are these valve stems right here from Apex. These are several different pieces here. It looks like most of this is billet aluminum. They've got several little O-rings and seals on them and stuff. Basically, you put this in place of the valve stem. You got these 2 nuts that go on the back side to hold it in place. And then you have on the outside here is pretty much a standard looking valve stem for the most part. They've got a cap that threads on there. You unthread that cap, and then you can actually pull on this right here. You'll notice that there are 4 holes right there. So you have a large diameter on this side letting the air come out, and then all that air is bleeding out through those 4 holes. I'd be willing to say that this is probably flowing something like 4 times the amount of air that your standard valve stem is to let the air out. We already tested it once, and I'll tell you right now, it is fast to let the air out. It's so fast that if you went over there and you did it, you wouldn't want to walk away because your tire would be flat if you did. So in order to keep from accidentally letting the air out, a stick or something like getting in there and pulling that up, that's the whole reason that cap is actually threaded on there. So you just thread it on there, get it nice and snug. If you're worried about it coming loose, rattling off down the trail, or someone coming along and loosening it and letting you out or something like that, they do have a hex key in the end of it, so you can just use your Allen wrench. You can put just a small amount of torque on there just to help make sure that it doesn't come off there. I've never heard of that. Plus, the kind of guy that is running these probably has onboard air, so who really cares? So whenever you order these up, you can get them in sets of 4, sets of 5. Obviously, I only need 4. I don't have a spare. They came with this nice little cheat sheet here. It's very dummy proof as far as the install goes. It tells you how the entire valve stem goes together with the seals, the O-rings, stuff like that. It tells you the torque ratings of like the nuts on the back side of here and things like that. It's very, very simple to install, and we will actually show you how to do that whenever I mount up the rest of these Alba Racing beadlock wheels. All right, the first thing I'm going to show you is actually how to dismount this beadlock wheel from the tire. In order to dismount a wheel, you're going to need a few basic tools. For starters, I use a valve core removal tool. That way I can get all the air out of here first, because you don't want to be taking any of these beadlock ring bolts out whenever it's still full of air. You're just going to end up hurting yourself. Gonna use the old impact with a socket on it so you can get all these beadlock ring bolts out of there. And because this is a single beadlock, so the bead is actually held in place with the beadlock ring on this side, but the back side over here is still down in a groove inside the wheel. You have to break that bead free from the wheel. In order to do that, it's best to have a tool specifically for that. You could use like a tire spoon. Those you can damage your wheel with them fairly easily if you don't know what you're doing. I know some guys will actually just put the tire, underneath like a trailer and use the tongue jack. In a pinch, you could have a buddy hold this thing in place and you could drive a heavy vehicle over it. Those aren't the best methods. You can end up damaging your tire, your wheel very easily, or get yourself hurt. So usually it's best to have the right tool for the job. I like to use this bead breaker right here. It's from Raceline Wheels. It wasn't that costly really for the home shop. So basically you'll end up putting this on here like this, and you'll do that, and then you'll pull this down, and it actually forces that tire down off of that bead in the wheel. It's fairly easy to use. It's just a little bit labor intensive, but I'll show you how to do that here in just a moment. All right, first up, like I said, we're going to take out the valve cord just so we can release all the air pressure out of here. So just remove the old valve stem cap. Mine are red just because in the snow you can see them a little bit easier if you drop one or whatever. Kind of makes it handy. All right, now that we've got the air out, I'm just going to use the impact with a socket and get all these bolts out of the way. Before I get too far, I've got this beadlock ring off there now, but I want to make sure that I don't lose that valve stem core, so I'm going to go ahead and get that put back into place. Now that I've got the beadlock ring off there, I went ahead and set down a welding blanket down on the concrete. I'm just trying to help prevent from damaging the other side of the wheel there any. What I'm going to do is use a little Windex as lubricant here just to help get the tool in here to break this bead. Again, if you don't have the proper tool to do this, I would suggest you actually take it somewhere that can do it. Like most tire stores will. Now, most tire stores won't touch a beadlock, but if you have the beadlock ring off there and you tell them, look, I'm not asking you to actually mount the beadlock, I'm actually asking you just to break this bead off there for me, usually they will actually go ahead and do that for you. If you don't have the tool, it's worth a shot, I think, to go ahead and try that. So with this tool, what you actually do is hook it under the wheel here on this side. And then we're gonna hook the other side under too. Now remember I said this was kind of labor intensive. Like this. Basically just do a little bit and then you wanna go ahead and work your way around the wheel. At first it's a little bit hard to do, and then as you get more and more of the tire broken down off there, it actually starts to get easier. If you need to, go ahead and throw a little more Windex back on there. Now these wheels have a groove in them. Every single beadlock wheel that I've ever mounted had some sort of low spot in there, and that really helps in mounting and dismounting the tires. And just like that, we've got the tire dismounted. All right, next up, I need to actually mount up these new valve stems from Apex. So what I've got to actually do is get this old valve stem out of the wheel, because these wheels came with valve stems in them already. Most of the wheels I've bought, you had to actually put the valve stem in there yourself. You could take the time and try to get these out without damaging them, but I mean, valve stems, they're so cheap, it's not even worth it. So all I'm going to do is go ahead and get the cap off here and the little protective cover, and then I'm just going to snip these old ones out of there, get them out of the way. Now I'm actually using some flush cut pliers, and the reason I'm doing it on this side instead of this side is because you're never going to see this. So if I actually hurt the finish of the wheel, it really doesn't matter. This side, if you messed up the powder coating or whatever, then you're going to see it, and that sucks. So just snip the end of it off there, toss it in the trash. Now, whenever you install these, you're going to need a few simple tools. This is a 14 mil for these nuts that go on there. You need some sort of oil because you need to lube up these seals right here that actually seal this against the wheel. I have some pliers just in case here. And then you need some Loctite, either blue or red is what it says on the little install sheet. I like using red just because I don't want one of these to come loose. Now, with these valve stems, they actually come with this little mount here. That's what this is. This is to actually mount your tire pressure sensor. The razors obviously don't have those, so you can just remove this for the side-by-sides. But if you're in a full-size rig and you're using these, just know that they have a little tire pressure sensor mount on them, which is nice. What you need to do is take both of these nuts off of the valve stem. And then they have this little stepped or flange seal here, and then there's an O-ring on this side right here. What we're going to do is take the valve stem from the inside, and then this right here, you actually need to put a little bit of that oil on. So I'm just going to kind of move it around there a little bit to make sure that there's some oil on all of it. Next up, you can put your first nut. All right, now that first nut that goes on there, the little instruction sheet they give you tells you to torque that to 25 to 45 inch-pounds. So basically it's around 2 to 4 foot-pounds. 2 to 4 foot-pounds is not very much, so I'm not even grabbing my torque wrench like I normally do. After you get the first one on there, you're going to actually use Loctite for the second nut. And these nuts that go on there are so thin that you can't even fit, like I have a set of thinner wrenches, and I can't even get one of those on there just because of the height of these nuts. So you just kind of got to do the best that you can about tightening them against each other. All right, real fast, whenever I was putting the nuts on that valve stem, I still wasn't that comfortable with the amount of force that I was able to get on the outer nut there. So what I actually ended up doing was grabbing a set of needle nose pliers, and I stuck just the tips up there on that first nut, and I really put some tension on it. And I was able to kind of hold it in place while I used the ratchet to get that second nut actually tighten against it, because that's what you're doing whenever you double nut something like that, is you're actually locking them against each other. So I'm pretty confident that it's going to be just fine now. So next thing I need to do is actually get this mounted inside the tire. So to do that, grab the old Ultra Lube here and just spray it all over the bead of the tire. Take your wheel, and you're going to take the side that has the beadlock ring, or the beadlock ring would actually mount to, and that's the one you're actually going to put down in there. These Baja Crusher wheels actually go down in here fairly easily. Some of the other wheels I've had, they're a little bit tighter, but remember, like I said, there's always that groove in the wheel, and if you use that groove to your advantage, you can usually get the wheels to pop down in there. The next thing you need to do, well, you don't have to, but what I like to do is actually line this valve stem up with some marker on the tire. And the whole reason I do that is because, like I said, I like to snow wheel a lot. The inside of your wheel oftentimes just gets completely caked with snow. So whenever you need to air down or air up, it's really nice to know where that valve stem is at, so you're not sitting there dragging all that snow out. You can go right to it. So what I do on these Trxus tires is actually line up. This T is kind of like an arrow, and I put it right in line with where the valve stem's at. It's just a little trick because you can usually see the letters on the outside of the tire, but you can't see the inside of the wheel. Again, the other thing that I was doing was putting those colored valve stem caps on there. Don't really need to with these. Well, I can't with these valve stems anyway, so that option is out. So in order to mount the beadlock ring, you're going to need some basic tools. A lot of guys don't like using impacts with beadlocks. I use them. I just don't sit here going to town with it. I just use it to speed up the process. So I've got one right here, and then this is another one. I just have two because I have two different size bolt heads, and I'll talk about that in just a second. You should use a torque wrench to do the final torque rating on your wheels. These Alba wheels for this beadlock ring, I think the instructions said 14 to 16 foot-pounds. These inner bolts right here might have been 12 to 14, but I'll have to double check on that. Whenever you're doing a beadlock, you need to think about the thickness of the bead on the tire. This is a truck tire, or a light truck tire, so this bead is thicker than most side-by-side tires are. This one measures just barely under 5/8 of an inch. So the reason you need to think about that is because the length of bolts. We already mounted one up, and whenever we first started, I thought the bolts might be too short. And once we got them torqued all the way down, I could actually see the ends of the threads come through these nut certs on the back side. So I know I got 100% engagement there, and I'm fine with that. But whenever I first started off putting these bolts in here, they were only catching like the first thread. And my worry was that whenever I start torquing them down, I was just going to rip that first thread out. So it's good practice to have another bolt that's longer if you're in that situation where they're just barely starting. And that's only if you don't need to get longer bolts. If you need to get all longer bolts, then by all means do that. But I'm just going to use one longer one, suck the beadlock ring down just a little bit so I can get the rest of them around it started. All right, so you can see what I did right here was actually put this longer bolt I had in, and I just torqued it down a little bit. That way I could get these bolts on either side of it actually started, so I didn't risk stripping those threads out. So I'm just going to repeat this step 80 degrees out from that one, do a little star pattern, and go ahead and get all these bolts started in there. Now remember, you always want to start bolts like this by hand. That way you don't risk stripping something out. All right, so I've got all of the bolts on here started so far. What I'm going to do is go in a star pattern with this little mini impact, and I'm not going to be going crazy with it, but I've got to get this beadlock ring sucked down. I've done this enough times to know that I can actually go around this a few times with this, and whenever I throw a torque wrench on it, I'm still probably not even going to be at 10 foot-pounds. Remember, I'm trying to torque these to 14 to 16, and this brings up another point, is that whenever you're doing these beadlock rings, you have to go around them multiple times. Like I mentioned in my other video, that whenever you're torquing one bolt, as soon as you get back around, the fasteners next to it and stuff are loosened back up. They're not holding that same torque rating. That's why you have to do multiple times around the ring just to get all of these torqued down. It wouldn't be a bad idea to double check the torque on this wheel, because this 3-piece, you never know, they might not have gotten these center bolts right here torqued down to that 12 to 14. So just double check them. You never know if they miss some or whatever, and you're going to be flying down the trail and have one come loose on you or whatever. So good practice, but go ahead and start torquing these down. All right, just finished up going around this probably a good 3 or 4 times with that little mini impact. So just real fast, I can show you that right now that fastener is only at about 10 foot-pounds or so. That's what most of them are. I've already went around there and checked them. Remember, I got to torque them to 14 to 16. So is it a big deal to use that little mini impact jumping around, getting them up there just to save you some time? Personally, I don't think so. But if you strip one out, that's on you. So anyways, now I'm going to run back with the torque wrench and go ahead, do that star pattern, and get all of these to that 14 to 16 foot-pounds. Then we can get air inside this thing. All right, we've got all these beadlock ring bolts fastened down to that 14 to 16 range. Next thing we got to do is actually set the bead back here. Whenever you're doing this, you need to make sure and check the air pressure rating for seating the bead on both the tire and the wheel. This tire, it'll list it right in here near the bead. This particular tire says not to exceed 30 PSI whenever you're seating it. This wheel, I didn't see any literature in the box, and I didn't notice anything on their website. The past wheels that I've done, I've noticed it's usually around 20 PSI or so. So I'm just going to kind of use that as like a cautionary thing and just go with like the 20 PSI as far as the wheel rating. Basically what that means is whenever I'm putting air in here, if I'm starting to get close to that mark, you need to really be careful because you don't want to exceed that pressure because you could damage something or possibly end up hurting yourself. So what I like to do, use the old super lube again and just lube up the bead on the tire and the wheel. For adding the air, I like to use one that has the little clip for your valve stem. The reason why, if you're by yourself here, it makes it a little bit easier. I'm going to clip it on. Now usually you can put a little pressure against the wheel so that it starts to make a seal against the tire, and then you can start adding air to it. And once you actually get a little bit in there, you can actually take that pressure off. It's not a bad idea whenever you're doing this, once you start to actually get some pressure in there, to keep that beadlock ring facing away from you so that if it does fail, then it's just going to blow out there. It's not going to actually run into your leg or anything. I've only got about 5 PSI in there right now. I'm just watching the bead right here. You're always going to hear at least one pop from it popping onto like over that little groove or over the little bump on the inside of the wheel there and actually seating the bead. Sometimes you hear 2, but you're going to need to at least hear 1. Right there, we're sitting at about 16 PSI. I'm just looking around this to make sure it's nice and uniform. I don't think I'm going to get a second pop. I think it's only going to be 1, just by the way the bead was kind of going around the wheel right there. You can always double check. Just grab some soapy water or whatever. In this case, the old Windex multi-tool here. Just spray it around there. Look to see if you've got any sort of air leaks because it's going to bubble up. I'm not seeing anything right now, so I'd say that it is definitely seated. All right, so what we're going to do right here is show you all just how fast these Apex Performance Products valve stems can let that air out of your tire. This one has the Apex valve stem in it, and the STI beadlock wheel over here just has your standard valve stem in it. What Tony's going to do is actually clip on one of those little chucks that we commonly use whenever we're out snow wheeling to let the air out of that one. And whenever he clips it on, I'm also going to pull the release on the Apex valve stem, and we're going to time it here, and we're just going to go all the way down to 0. Both of these tires are set at 15 PSI using the same gauge, so you know that it's a fair comparison as far as letting the air out. We've got the timer here, so Tony, you ready? Ready. And start. 5 seconds right there. Coming up on 20 seconds. We're starting to get down pretty low on pressure right here as far as what you'd see whenever we're out snow wheeling. You start to see this nice wrinkle in the sidewall of the tire there. I don't really like to go much past where it's at right now. That's 35 seconds. It's getting pretty flat right now. You can barely hear the air coming out of it. Still coming out just barely. Coming up on a minute now. I can't hear any air coming out of this one anymore. So she's flat right around that minute mark. This one over here, you can still see it has a decent amount of air in there. I'd be willing to bet that it probably every bit of 11 PSI or so in there at least still. And I mean, that's sitting at almost a minute and a half now. We'll go ahead and let it go all the way down to time it, and we'll just fast forward it so you guys don't have to sit through it, and just see how long it takes. All right, so we're rolling up on almost 13 minutes here. I can just barely hear sound coming out of this still, but she's pretty much flat right there. So again, I think it was like a minute, and that thing was completely flat, no air or sound whatsoever. And this one, 13 minutes just to get it down there. So it saves you considerable time out there. So Tony was curious just how fast the tire was going to let all the air out if we actually removed that valve core. Now remember, we don't advise doing that out there on the trail as far as how you air down, just because you're just asking to drop that core in the snow or in between a rock or whatever you're doing. And then you got to pull one out of your spare one that you should be carrying. So real fast, we are going to test it. We aired it right back up to 15 PSI, use the same gauge, so it's a fair comparison. And Tony's going to hit start on the time as soon as you start to hear the air coming out of here. We're almost to that minute mark that the apex valve stem was at till perfectly flat. We're getting ready to cross over it now. You can still hear the air coming out. So obviously the apex valve stem is faster than even just removing the valve core. That's not surprising to us because we were actually looking at the diameter of the inside of a standard valve stem and comparing it to the diameter on that apex valve stem, and it was still considerably larger. So yeah, really that's not surprising that it's even faster than removing the valve cores. We're coming up on a minute and a half right here. It is almost flat. I can just barely hear the air coming out. So it's not bad as far as how long it takes to air down. I just don't like running that risk of losing that valve core. But anyways, hopefully you guys learned something. Make sure you click like, subscribe, share it with your buddies, and we'll catch you guys next time.